With me on the program this morning, Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer and Labor frontbencher Nick Champion. Good morning to you both. There are many different aspects to this ongoing story and conflict. Kelly, to you first of all, as you look closer to home, there are 200 Indonesians believed to be fighting in this conflict. President Yudhoyono this morning has told Greg Sheridan in The Australian that we need to unite. His government certainly taking a very strong stand against this terrorist group. That's encouraging, that step at least, given Indonesia and its so crucial importance to our strategic future.
Well, President Yudhoyono is absolutely right, and it is important that all nations around the world reject this Islamic terrorist movement and do all that we can to ensure not only that we defeat these people who have such evil, murderous intent, but also that we stop our own citizens from being engaged with these terrorist activities, and we stop the radicalisation of our own citizens who go overseas to fight with these terrorists, and also that we make sure that we protect our citizens at home. And the government has put into place a very strong program, not only to continue the counter-terrorism laws that were put in place by the previous Howard government, which are now coming up to expiry because of the sunset clauses, but also looking at whether there are new measures that need to be put in place to make sure that we can counter this threat. And we have also provided an extra $600 million, over $600 million of funding for our key agencies so that they can cooperate together to make sure that we don't have terrorist incidents at home.
Well, that hasn't gone down well with everyone, Nick Champion. A group of 60 representatives from the Muslim community disagree with their fellow followers of Islam that worked with the Prime Minister and the government in cooperating and working on these counter-terrorism laws. 60 of them writing yesterday about their opposition, including 10 sheikhs, that there is no solid evidence to substantiate the threat of 150 radicalised Australian Muslims fighting in Iraq, and that these reflect racist caricatures, rejecting these laws as being focusing entirely on the Islamic community. What do you say to that criticism from this group that was made yesterday?
Well, look, I guess looking at President Obama's comments and looking at SBY's comments, President of Indonesia, they call on governments and on religious leaders and on civil society to unite to combat what is a pretty poisonous and nihilistic ideology, and one that doesn't reflect the mainstream of Islam. And obviously in Australia we want to, as best we can, join together to pass laws through the Parliament that enforce and protect our collective security, and we want to bring civil society, all those community groups, along with us to accept those laws. And obviously we need them to help combat extremism in communities. Obviously the greatest threat is from lone wolves of people who self-radicalise, or small groups who self-radicalise, and we need to work together to make sure that these groups are isolated, dissuaded from adopting such nihilistic and dangerous ideologies, and where they're committing criminal activity, we need to, obviously let them feel the full weight of the law.
Kelly, what do you think about this criticism yesterday from a group of 60 representatives who suggested that the evidence has been trumped up against members of the Australian community, but also followers of Islam, of course, that are the intelligence community believes are fighting in Iraq? This group says that the evidence has been trumped up and they're not going to rubber stamp the counter-terrorism laws.
Well, I'm going to be an absolute straight talker on this, and in between what Nick said, I think possibly he might agree with me. Look, I completely reject it. We have a responsibility as a government to protect all Australian citizens. And those people who live here in this country with our freedoms and our values should also want to protect our way of life in Australia. I completely reject the idea that somehow this threat has been manufactured. It simply has not. We know through our counter-terrorism activities that there are over 150 Australian citizens who have gone from Australia to fight with terrorist organisations overseas, Islamic terrorists, and we have to make sure that we do all that we can to ensure that those people firstly don't return in order to present a threat to us here in Australia, and that those who might be thinking of committing acts of terror in Australia are thwarted in those attempts. We have seen success through our previous counter-terrorism laws in actually being able to apprehend those people who have wanted to commit violent acts on Australian soil. These are not trumped up, this is very real, and everyone should take the threat very seriously.
In that context then, I want to put to you some criticism from one moderate Muslim leader who has been one of 4 that has faced threats to himself given his criticism of Islamic State in Sydney. He is well known, Dr. Jamal Rifi. He's got real concerns about the lack of resources being spent to stop radicalisation in the first place. Kelly, there was a program known as the Building Community Resilience Program, only $1.5 million from the Attorney General's Department. It's been run since 2011, helping the likes of Dr. Rifi to run these de-radicalisation or programs to stop the radicalisation of young people in Australia. And it's been stopped, that program. $1.5 million is not a lot of money. If you've got the counter-terrorism law, don't you also need that money being spent to stop the radicalising in the first place?
Well, let me make this very first point, and that is that moderate Islamic leaders in our community who condemn terrorism and condemn radicalisation should actually be applauded and should not be condemned. So I make that first point, and we need to see more people standing up against this terrorist activity and this radicalisation. The second point I make is, of course, we have to look at all the mechanisms that we have, all the tools in our armoury in order to actually deal with radicalisation. That's through counter-terrorism laws, that's through surveillance, that's through stopping the radicalisation in the first place. I know that we're going to be presenting some laws to the Parliament in the coming weeks. I won't preempt any announcements that the government will be making in that regard, but you can be assured that we'll be looking at all aspects of the problem.
One related issue, Nick Champion, that's been raised by Dr. Rifi and also by the former counter-terrorism officer Peter Moroney, who spent 18 months following Khalid Sharoof, that notorious terrorist who's in the Middle East at the moment, that both of them raised the point that there's no point just cancelling passports without associated measures. That in his words, this former counter-terrorism officer, it's like pulling the pin on a hand grenade and leaving it in a confined space by cancelling these individuals' passports. What do you say to those concerns about elements of this?
Well, I think the greater concern is that Mr. Sharoof could actually escape the country. That was the greater problem, I think, on the government's part. And they still haven't fully explained about how that occurred, how he managed to get past passport control and enter Syria to fight there. It seems to me the government talks a very good game on this, and I certainly hope their sentiments are carried through in their fullness. But we see these people actually leaving the country to go fight in Syria. So that is a very serious problem. Obviously, you have to have measures in your own internal security to deal with any threat that might present itself, whether it be people who want to go fight for ISIL or people who are engaging in other forms of terrorism.
What about the argument, Kelly, that you just let them go and let them revoke their citizenship if they want to go? Let them go. That's an argument being put by some of the members of the community. Otherwise, again, you're, in the words of Peter Moroney, you're pulling the pin on a hand grenade and leaving it in a confined space by simply cancelling their passports.
Well, look, we don't want people to go overseas and engage in terrorist activities, and we will not encourage people to do that, and we will not make it easy for people to actually do that. You know, there are a lot of also quite impressionable young people who are engaging in this sort of activity, and it's important that we intervene and intervene very early. The second point I make is, you know, that there have been a number of discussions on this topic of citizenship. There was a private member's motion brought by the member for Cowan looking at people with dual citizenship. It's not a government motion, but it was a private member's motion. But I thought, you know, within that motion, he made some very good points about people who hold dual citizenship, who want to go off and fight overseas, whether or not they effectively revoke their Australian citizenship in actually wanting to do that. And I think we have to look at some of those options as well. Mm.
Okay, and Nick, finally to you on this before we wrap up our discussion on this story this morning. In terms of the radicalisation and the efforts to combat that in the early stages, should government, should both sides of politics here be focusing more on that and spending more on that to help the individuals that we've referred to, some of the moderate leaders in Sydney and elsewhere who are trying to do this of their own volition?
Well, we saw in the budget a program that you referred to be actually cancelled. So it's not just a question of doing more. In the government's case, they're actually doing less. And we don't want to see young people who are very impressionable, you know, adopt nihilistic, dangerous, extremist ideologies of any type. And we need to work with the community where we can to prevent that.
We've got to go to a break. Back in just a moment with Kelly O'Dwyer and Nick Champion this Thursday.
There's show business, the construction business, the fashion, the retail, and the business of catering. There's the hospitality business, agribusiness, and countless other businesses. And then there's the can business. Who can help to keep your business moving? CommBank can.
Finding everything okay?
I work for a different insurance company, but my car policy is getting a little too expensive.
Good news for you. Progressive is 100% online, which means we can save you heaps on our car insurance.
All online? I love this place. Dad? Steve?
Oh, it's an office party.
Visit progressiveonline.com.au to see if you could save.
The world abounds with many delights, magical sights, fanciful flights, and those who dream on beautiful nights dream of beautiful things. The world is full of beautiful things, beautiful people too, beautiful people like you.
It's Coles Zero MasterCard time.
With the Coles No Annual Fee MasterCard, you pay zero annual fee and pay 0% interest on balance transfers for 6 months if you apply and are approved for a new Coles MasterCard.
Zero interest for 6 months.
Plus, you can get the Coles mobile wallet that costs zero.
Oh, yeah.
Apply for a Coles No Annual Fee MasterCard today at coles.com.au/credit cards.
Coles MasterCard.
When I got the phone call from my family that my father had passed away, I didn't know how I was going to get there to say goodbye until I heard from Insurance Line.
Thankfully, Thomas did something great for his family and left them funeral insurance with Insurance Line.
I found the policy in the big folder and everything out at his residence. So I phoned Insurance Line up. They took care of everything. I got to attend his funeral thanks to my father.
Insurance Line's new funeral insurance has premiums that are guaranteed never to go up, so your premiums will stay the same and not go up every year as you get older. Your family will also have the money fast, usually within 24 hours of lodging a complete claim.
It was very quick. It was like 24 hours and off we were, and we were able to say goodbye. It's peace of mind. It's just a huge weight lifted.
Talk to Insurance Line about new funeral insurance today on 13 25 95.
This is AM Agenda. With me this morning, Kelly O'Dwyer and Nick Champion. Now to the ongoing sell of the budget. Joe Hockey was on the PVO News Hour last night discussing the tens of billions in savings and revenue measures, which look still set to be blocked in the Senate. Let's have a look.
Don't write those initiatives off because, you know, as we said today, as Matthias Cormann, myself, the Prime Minister, have said today, the day-to-day bills are being paid. The day-to-day running of the budget is being done. Most of the budget has passed through the Senate. We are now dealing with the structural challenge left by Labor.
Kelly O'Dwyer, what do you say to criticism from the crossbench and others? From Nick Xenophon, he puts it this way, the mixed message on the budget, that 2 days ago the budget was on life support, now it's on a banana lounge on Hayman Island.
Well, Nick is always good with a catchy line, but we've been entirely consistent with our message right throughout. We have always said that Labor left a deficit and debt disaster for this country and for future generations to pay off, and we also said they put in place unsustainable spending measures that needed to be contained. Otherwise we would end up like other countries in Europe and have to make far more draconian changes. Now, that's a message that we heard yesterday from the Reserve Bank Governor. I chair the House of Representatives Economics Committee, and the Reserve Bank Governor was actually asked about fiscal consolidation, and, you know, I'm paraphrasing him here, but he said it was very prudent to do it. It was something that we needed to do over the medium term, that structural change was in fact very important, and it was important so that we could withstand economic shocks in the future. Why are we having to go through these measures? Well, the reason is because despite Labor sort of trying to point the finger everywhere else, Labor delivered $191 billion of cumulative deficits in the budgets that they did deliver, and left and bequeathed to the nation deficits totalling $123 billion going forward over the forward estimates period, as well as gross debt heading upwards of $667 billion without change.
Yeah, well, so, Nick Champion, I'll get him to respond to this, because this was from Governor Stevens a fairly clear endorsement of the government's fiscal consolidation.
Well, I don't think so. I think he's just mapping out that over time you want to have fiscal consolidation. That was the same under the previous government as it is under this government. The problem for this government is that their rhetoric, I mean, before the election they told people a whole lot of a set of commitments. They then broke them all in this budget of broken promises, and now they've had some very confused rhetoric. One minute there's a budget emergency, and we've got the Trade Minister of all people going out there and saying that the budget failure to pass a budget represents a sovereign risk to Australia, which is an extraordinary thing for a Trade Minister to say. And then the next moment we've got Joe Hockey on Sky saying, oh, nothing to see here, the bills are all being paid and the budget's been done. And then this morning we have Kelly back on the emergency rhetoric. I mean, this government cannot hold a line between breakfast and lunchtime, and their problem is it's a confected emergency to basically embrace a whole lot of regressive changes which have been in the Liberal Party's DNA for a very long time, and they want to make the poor pay for all of this. All of it, all of their budget changes. The poor and working families are bearing the brunt of it, and the top end of town just skates free. Skates free.
Well, can I just respond to that,
Kelly,
Nick? Because I think
you can have a response. Sure.
I just think it's really breathtaking to hear that response from Nick, because you know, he wants to talk about the poor paying more and having the burden. Well, the reason that we are in the situation we are today is because Labor, despite, you know, wanting to try and you know, muddy the waters on this issue, they are actually responsible from taking Australia from a position of economic strength, where we actually had money set aside in the Future Fund, where we were actually getting interest payments because we had saved money. We'd repaid back Labor's $96 billion of debt. They took us in reverse. They have set Australia back into
global
reverse.
Financial crisis, Kelly.
And well,
there was a global financial crisis. You do remember that.
I mean,
you missed that in your little history lesson.
I know that this is.
You want to go back and talk about history. You can't avoid the global financial crisis. If you want to talk about history, you can't avoid the global financial crisis. Why don't you talk about that when you give us your history lesson?
Okay, let's hear what Kelly has to say to that.
Okay. I'm happy to talk about it
Please,
because I actually
Kelly.
think it's a really important point. We did have an economic shock through the global financial crisis. The reason we were able to get through it as well as we did is not because Labor started spending an extraordinary amount of money and getting us into a significant amount of debt. The reason we were able to get through it is because we actually had money in the bank. We had a sensible prudential regulation in this country. We had good, strong monetary policy as well. All of those factors work together to actually get us through the crisis. The problem is...
And there was also China as well.
If we have economic... obviously China, but if we also have an economic shock today, how will we get through this? And this is what Labor doesn't want to talk about.
I need to move on and ask Nick Champion about the comments from Martin Ferguson over the mining tax. I've got Wayne Swan joining me after 9 a.m. this morning, Nick, but this further navel-gazing over Labor's period office, as a frontbench member, current frontbench member, how do you reflect on this? Former ministers still having a go at each other?
Oh, look, I guess I reflect on it in that that's all history now. This is essentially a book about the history of the global financial crisis and of a previous government. And look, there'll be lots of debates, just as there was about the Howard government, the Keating government, the Hawke government, the Menzies government. It's the history books now, and we've got to look to the future, and that's what the Labor Party's doing.
Gee, nice try.
Kelly, finally.
No, I was just going to say, look, nice try. Nick can't even keep a straight face when he sort of says all of that. I mean, Labor was clearly
just
very
anticipating
divided.
your response, Kelly. Just anticipating your response.
Very divided. We still see Labor not coming to terms with the legacy that they left, always pointing the finger at others, not taking responsibility for what they have done.
Okay.
And well, hang on. I listened to you. Not taking responsibility for what they've done, and today we have the leader of the opposition simply trying to not only not recognise the problem that we face and the challenges that we face, but playing a wrecking role in a similar way to a number of other members in the Senate are playing
Kelly,
right now.
we've got to go. We've got to go. Thank you both. And Kelly, you can say hi to Wayne Swan on your way out there in Brisbane. Thank you for your time, both of you, this morning. It's coming up to 9 o'clock East.